to you.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. It's not quite afternoon yet. I definitely.
What the heck just happened?
Yes, I really just have wanted to answer a couple questions for you guys that you might have based off of anything you have for wrapping up final details. The first things first is congratulations. This is the end of the road in terms of your education with PIMA, so that's exciting. I'm happy for all of you and each one of you. The virtual graduation date through PIMA should be in December. The date is not yet set. You'll get lots of information about that if you haven't already. They'll be sending out quite a bit of information. The second thing is there was a miscommunication. Miss Carol Johnson did not set up the exit interviews yet. Those are important. And so her and I have a call here shortly, actually, as soon as I'm off with you guys. She was supposed to have already contacted you guys. And thank you to Ian and a few other people for emailing me and letting me know. You guys might have noticed it's an assignment link in PTA 209. And there would be no way that you guys could complete that. It is mandatory for the Department of Education and Financial Aid to do a financial aid exit interview. So it's not just a PIMA thing, it's a Department of Education thing. It also really helps us in terms of your guys' course reviews. I realize this was the pandemic and you guys are going to forever be known as the pandemic class of the resilient, brave people that you are. And I'm so proud of each one of you for hanging in there and powering through despite so many obstacles. But yeah, so I'm going to just leave it up for questions at this point, because I do want to reach out to the reps. If there are a group of you that are interested in a cardio pulm review, give you guys, I know you have neuro peds today, a couple hours to kind of contemplate and think about if you wanted to do something like that either tomorrow or maybe possibly Monday. I know you have the peds, so maybe even Tuesday. I'd be open to it. So just let me know what might work better. I did post the slides already up on a Blackboard. And so some of you, the slides might be sufficient. Some of you might want to see me and actually go over it and have questions. So just let me know. I'll let the reps kind of take lead on that and reach out to me, okay? Does anybody have any specific questions in terms of like how things are going to go? The PED will be on Monday. Those of you that want to come, I highly encourage. We'll try to mock and simulate but you can also take it from home. So that is completely up to you in the safety of your home. You'll check in for those of you who haven't been to campus. At front desk, they'll take your temperature. You have to wear a mask and of course have your ID. And since it is on campus, you will be wearing your polos. So anyone have any specifics for me? No, in terms of taking it home, Mr. McKeever, Russell asked if there's any specifics if they decide to do it at home. I don't know that there's a set procedure for that.
There's no specific procedure for taking it, just that, understand that it's not going to let you stop it and restart it. So you need to make sure that you have dedicated time to sit there and complete the whole way through. So it's not like the score builders test where you can pause it. You can't pause it. You got to go the whole way through it.
Okay. Was there anyone else? And feel free to unmute yourself. I know chat is fine, but the only reason I'm not on is because my Wi-Fi is acting up again, thanks to CenturyLink. And I don't have enough bandwidth. I looked really scary in the video when I tried it earlier. So, but I can hear you guys if you can hear me. So feel free. Anyone have any other questions? In terms of the PET, I didn't require that one as an additional assignment. However, if you want feedback, absolutely send it to Mr. McKeever and myself. He's actually, I'll be honest, he's more of an expert than I am at looking those and breaking them down and kind of showing you what content it'll give you a general idea of things, but yeah, feel free to send it to both of us and we'll give you guys feedback about, readiness, the cutoffs, etc. So. Well, Mr. McKeever, I think they're all, will it give us our score right away? Yes, yep, it gives it right away. As soon as you take it, it'll have and you can screenshot. I believe you have the ability it'll email it to you and you can save it for, and then you can forward it right to us. So
yeah, it allows you to print it to PowerPoint, do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
The only thing you can't print are the questions themselves. I mean, you can screenshot the questions, like there's a specific question, you're like, I have no idea what this is. Because it'll give you a rationale if you take it. Each question will give you a rationale as to why the answers are right or wrong. And there's still some where you'll go, I have no idea why this is wrong. You can still screenshot that and send that to us and ask us about it, but you can't like print it or copy and paste it or anything. You have to actually screenshot it and send it to us. So they're kind of protective about that. Pretty much like Insight, except Insight allows you a little bit, gives you a little bit more detail because it'll give you like the page numbers and stuff like that. This mainly gives you just, here's the rationale for it. Most times you'll read, it'll be like, safety is the rationale behind this. Safety is the rationale behind this. All right.
Okay, well, I think that, yeah, that looks like,
Daniel?
yeah, that looks like the end of questions for me. I'll turn it over to Mr. McKeever. If you guys come up with something, or if you just didn't feel comfortable asking it to the class, you guys know how to get a hold of me. Shoot me an email. We'll set up an individual Zoom. If our reps, though, if you guys could please just reach out to your colleagues, see if anybody is interested. My feelings will not be hurt. If you guys feel the PowerPoint is fine, or if you take the PED and you knock it out of the park and feel ready to go, that's also a good sign that you don't need it. So just let me know, okay? You guys take care. I'll let Mr. McKeever take it from here, okay? Thank you guys for letting me jump in. No, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be done at a set time.
No.
No.
I would take it as close to when you're going to take the test as possible, though.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mr. McKeever. I appreciate you letting me jump in.
No problem. Thank you.
Take care, guys.
It doesn't necessarily have to be done on Monday. I would suggest it on Monday so it gives you maximal time to kind of review it. Let me bring up my PowerPoint that I created for this. Where is the PowerPoint? I don't want it on separate screens. Why did it do that? All right, over you over here. And we'll bring up the chat. I have to say, I thought it was amusing. Clark County School District contacted me and asked me if I wanted to come in and teach some of their sciences. Yes, it's already posted. I just posted about 5 minutes ago. And man, I understand why people don't teach for Clark County now. They do not pay well for substitute teaching, that's for sure. Anyway, so I sent out an email, and I apologize about yesterday. I was not aware that I was scheduled for yesterday. I'm not sure how that slipped through the cracks, but I got a few feedbacks on what people wanted to go over, and if there's anything at the end, well, obviously I'll see what I can type up and come up with at the end. But the main things that I'd heard back from was stuff like lung capacity, brachial plexus, pediatric reflexes. There's a couple other things I put in here, so we'll kind of go through them one by one. So the first thing that the number one thing I got back was lung capacity. Like I got 3 or 4 people email me back about lung capacity. And so this is that lovely chart that started way back in Anatomy 1. If you vaguely remember that carried through to Anatomy 2, that carried through to Patho, that carried through pretty much through everything. This is not as complicated as it looks. And do you have to memorize chart? Are they going to ask you specifically, what is this? No, typically not. They're not going to ask you specific questions, something like that. What they're going to be asking you a lot of times is what makes up vital capacity? What makes up total lung capacity? Or what makes up inspiratory capacity? They'll kind of break that down. So what I always say when you're kind of studying this is know the formulas that make up these. And in your score builders, they have a bunch of nice little formula sheets there for you. But when you look at this and you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Like inspiratory capacity is your inspiratory reserve volume versus your tidal volume, or with your tidal volume, right? Your total lung capacity is everything. Your vital capacity is what you're breathing in and out, right? So all that comes into play. It kind of does make sense, but don't get lost in the forest here. It's kind of one of the things I want to talk about. I have this nice chart here that has the volume on it as well. You don't have to know the specific volumes, but they might ask you saying that, something to the effect of, if total lung capacity here is 6,000 milligrams, or milliliters, right, or cc's, whichever you want to call it, and your vital capacity is 4,800 milliliters, what's your residual volume? Well, 6,000 minus 4,800 is 1,200. There's a possibility that could be a question in there. So you mainly need to understand the abbreviations. So they're not typically going to write out expiratory reserve volume, inspiratory reserve volume. They're usually going to write IRV, ERV, TLC, IC, stuff like that. But don't totally get lost in the weeds here, or the forest, or whatever you want to get lost in, because the main thing with these is that your questions are going to be more based upon what's going on in the body based upon them. And then also, you know, you might get maybe two questions on this. So this is not going to be something as important as something like, say, stroke, or even Parkinson's disease, or something to that effect, or autonomic dysreflexia. I got one on my boards way back when I took it when it was paper. I got one question on lung capacities, but I had 19 questions on autonomic dysreflexia. 19 questions. So, and I'll be honest, this is one of the areas I was terrified of, because that chart to me always looked so difficult. And I just, no matter what I did, it was not sticking. And so luckily enough, I mean, the questions I got were talking about, well, inspiratory capacity, you know, revolves around tidal volume plus what other item? Well, inspiratory capacity is also going to have something that I'm inspiring, right? So it's got to have that reserve volume. I put this nice video link here. This guy does a really good, it's one of those whiteboard drawing type videos. I'm not very good at those, but this video, he goes over it really well, and it's from a pulmonologist. So he breaks it down into really basic terms for biology students. And it was one of the things it was released back when I was in school, you know, when YouTube was not as big as it was now. And YouTube probably had 50 videos up. But it's been modernized now, obviously, because before he was actually drawing a whiteboard. Now it's one of the mechanical whiteboard things. But it's a really good video of it. And if you want, we'll watch it towards the end here. But that really does kind of help break down what each of those are. What's important to understand here, the main thing you need to understand are, what are we going to lose? Well, the two main things we're going to lose over time is our vital capacity and our forced expiratory volume. Those are the things we lose, right? The max amount of air you can forcibly exhale from your lungs after fully inhaling. So if you inhale, take a nice deep breath in, and all that you can leave, that doesn't leave that tidal volume, that's your forced vital capacity. So about 80% of your lung capacity, right? So it's about 80% of what you have left in your lungs. That decreases by about 0.2 liters per decade, even for healthy adults. So, right? So for every decade you're alive, it's going to go down by about 0.2 liters, right? So until you're like 80, 90, that's down pretty low. And that's kind of one of the things that's important to understand, is that that's the vital capacity is going to be one of the things that decreases. But more importantly is the FEV, the forced expiratory volume, right? Because what patients are going to have problems with the FEV specifically? What do you think? What condition? Emphysema, good. And which other one? COPD, right? Because COPD has emphysema. So it's that ability to actually get air out of the lungs, right? That's why we teach that pursed lip breathing. And if you've treated somebody with any obstructive disorder of the lungs, you can see this, because they get kind of that barrel chest look. Right, the chest looks constantly inflated, and they almost kind of look like they're puffing up, like they're, you know, Guido at the gym, because their chest is just kind of barrel chested, because the lungs don't ever deflate. And so this decreases about 1 to 2% per year after the age of 25. So once you hit 25, sorry, those of you that are there, you know, your life's starting to go downhill for that FEV. Now, can we improve that? Absolutely, right? Doing cardio training, stuff like that, we can help overall improve that, but it doesn't stop it necessarily from declining. So maybe if you're physically fit and you have a fairly good, healthy outlook on life, and you are getting cardio training done, you might keep it from going down by 1% to going down by 0.5%. But it's still going to go down. You just can't stop it. It's just the way it's going to be. That's why when you get older in life, if you ever hear somebody that's 80 or 90 breathe, they definitely kind of force more of that air out because they have trouble getting those lungs clear, right? That's why also a lot of patients will eventually die of things like pneumonia and, you know, emphysema, bronchitis, stuff like that, that'll cause them to die because their lungs just aren't allowing them to breathe as well. And that also thinks about it, because if you hold that air in there, if you've taken in virus, so let's say what we got right now with SARS-CoV, if you take in that SARS-CoV and you have a problem getting air back out, that means that COVID has longer to sit in the lungs and then get absorbed by the blood in the lungs and then get spread systemically throughout the body. That's what puts these older folks at risk. That's what puts everyone, you know, if you look at it, if our FEV is going down by 1 to 2% per year after 25, you figure by the age, let's just say you went down by 1% every year. By age 50, you're down 25%. Right, on a good scale, you're down 25%. Oh God, what's wrong with me? No, just kidding. So think about that. Now you've got your mom or your dad, because I'm assuming that's probably where some of your parents are at this point. You got your mom or your dad are in the 40s or 50s, right? This is why it's so important for them to avoid people that have the COVID virus, because if their FEV is down by 25%, they are already at risk to keep this virus in their lungs longer, which puts them more at risk to absorb the virus into the blood, which puts them more at risk to become a carrier of the virus, right? Now let's think about you guys that are healthy. Well, why could that put you guys at risk? Well, now let's think about it. So maybe you went to grandma's birthday party and Uncle John has COVID and didn't tell anyone. Well, maybe you only encounter Uncle John once and you spent 5 minutes in the vicinity of him. The likelihood of you keeping that in your lungs is pretty low, right? Now your mom or dad spends 10 or 20 minutes with Uncle John because, you know, Uncle John, everyone's got to spend a little bit of time with Uncle John because he just monopolizes the whole party. So they spend more time with him and they get that virus latent in their system because they can't expire it out, right? They can't breathe it out. Now they come home to you, right? Maybe, you know, if you look at the statistics right now, the current generation, about 57% of the current generation is living at home with mom and dad, even after 30. Right? So now mom and dad come home and they've got the virus. Now you're in proximity to them day after day after day after day. Now that leads you to get that virus because you have greater exposure to it, right? So that's a main thing that we experience here, right? That's why healthcare workers are more at risk to get this virus because we have a greater exposure to it. Doesn't necessarily mean that our lungs are bad. It just means we have greater exposure. But yeah, the main thing with lung capacity here is just learn as much makes sense to you. If something doesn't make sense to you, that's when you reach out to one of us. Because if IRV is not making sense, then maybe we need to talk about what's not making sense. It's usually something simple that's making sense, right? The main thing to understand is your vital capacity versus your total lung capacity, right? Your vital capacity is how much you can breathe in and out. And then your total lung capacity is how much you can breathe in and out, plus how much stays in your lungs. And as we get older, right, so here's our residual volume. That's the amount that's sitting in our lungs right now. As we get older, that residual volume is going to increase, right, and go up, whereas that vital capacity is going to go down. So that leaves all that residual volume sitting in your lungs there, just collecting up gunk, leading you to more diseases. And that's why we have things like respiratory therapy nowadays, is because we are realizing this was a major problem, right? You look back at what we used to do to patients that had stuff like bronchitis or bronchiectasis, or, you know, even something, you know, just horrific like Legionnaire's disease or something like that. We used to put them in iron lungs. And now we know that may not have been the best and wisest idea. So that's really my spiel on lung capacities. Was there something specific that you had a question on lung capacities that I can answer? Because there wasn't any specific questions. I just got lung capacities. What do I need to know? Is there anything specific? I was so scared somebody that logged off. All right, so I'll move on. If there's something specific that comes up, please just don't hesitate to ask, and I may save it to the end, but just don't hesitate. You can think of it as we're going through it, please. Should you memorize percentages? No, don't. That's just more numbers you have to memorize. There are far better things you could remember. You got to think of your memory kind of like a computer, right, or your phone. If you've got a phone, right, you've got your iPhone there. Your iPhone only has so much memory. If you load it up with stupid game apps, you're not going to be able to put your music on it for the gym. Same idea here. You load your brain up with stuff like percentages and that, you'll miss out on stuff like ATAXIA and APRAXIA, which are by far more important than memorizing percentages for lungs. Does that make sense? I'm sure it does. She gave me KK, so I'm going to go with that. All right, brachial plexus. A couple mnemonics to help you remember some of the things. And I know that Dr. Johnson probably didn't cover these. I'd mentioned them to him before, and he's like, nope, not going to do that. When you're, remember, the main thing about the brachial plexus, kind of remember how it's laid out. Right, so you've got your roots, your trunks, your divisions, your chords, your branches. And I always remember that, and the mnemonic I had for that was really tired, don't care now. Right? And the now was, I don't want, or don't care, was it now? Don't care. Why did I have now? I can't remember what. No, because now is nerves, which is the branches. I was trying to remember why I had now. Right? Because now equals nerves. I was like, why do I have that? It took me a little bit to remember that. Which are the branches, right? And when you get out to the branches for the nerves, the one I always remembered it as, most alcoholics must really urinate. Muscocutaneous, axillary, median, radial, ulnar. Okay, Marmu works too. Yep, any of those. Remember to drink cold. Okay, that'll work too. I never heard that one. I guess I like that one too. Actually, it's kind of easier to remember. Thanks, Jacqueline. I didn't even think about that one. But these are the ones I used. I always, for some reason, the most alcoholics must really urinate sticks in my head and that goes right along with remember to drink cold beer, I guess. So if you want them both, they're right there. But any type of mnemonic is your key to doing this. And when you get a mnemonic, right, when you get that mnemonic, one of the good things to do is as soon as you go in, write those mnemonics down, right? Just kind of write out, I didn't write out the full mnemonic, but I wrote out my letters, right? So I would write R, T, D, C, N, right? And then when I needed that, I could go back and look at those letters and remember what I'm But this kind of, remember this whole spiel here, right? We have our roots where everything kind of leaves us. So here's our anterior scalene, here's our medial scalene. What's that space between those two called? Do you remember? So that space between the anterior and the middle scalene. Yeah, the scalene triangle, right? Because it kind of looks like this. That's also a place where we get what type of problem? What happens up there? When that gets impinged, we call them having what disorder? Thoracic outlet syndrome. Good, right? Yeah, TOS. And what are some of the tests for that? Do you remember? Yay, okay, good. See, all this sticks. So, somewhat, right? So we have those roots. Those roots come out from those nerves, right? And they come out here and they start forming the trunks. Trunks are where we enter that aspect of the axilla through the cervical axilla canal, right? And then they start dividing off into the divisions, right? So I always look at it as the roots are where everything's growing from. The trunks are the trees. These are kind of those pre-branches, right? And then we end up out here in our cords where we divide out to our nerves. Along with all of that, though, we've got the subclavian artery running right with it that kind of feeds that blood flow to all those muscles, and we need that. Right? So then we go out here, we've got our axillary, we've got our radial, we've got our musculocule, median, ulnar, and it just basically at that point goes where they flow on the arm. So what do you need to know for this? Is it as important to remember and be able to draw the brachial plexus? Probably not. If you can draw the brachial plexus, will it help you on questions that you might get of the upper extremity or patients with spinal cord injuries? Absolutely, it could. It could give you that one-up knowledge that maybe somebody else didn't have. But is it as important to remember every single bit about the brachial plexus? Probably not. What's more important to remember are the nerves and the nerve roots, so your dermatomes and their myotomes, right? So remembering that, you know, musculocule arises from which nerve roots, right? That your median nerve goes to what part of aspect of the hand. Those are going to be more important than being able to draw out the brachial plexus. Other things kind of more important to understand is kind of problems with the brachial plexus. Obviously, we talked about thoracic outlet already. And now thoracic outlet is a combination of nerve problems, and it can also be a problem with blood flow, right? But when we talk about palsies of the arms, right? When do we normally see palsies of the arms develop? When do we see these palsies of the arms develop? I'm sure you've probably seen the ad from Sokolov Love on any channel. If your child is born with Erb's palsy, please contact Sokolov Love now about blah, 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 right? This happens when doc's pulling baby out, right? Maybe baby's breech birth, or maybe baby's not exactly lined up. So maybe doc had to use some forceps and rearrange baby. And when doc does that, maybe they pull in their arm a little too much. Or they get mommy, and mommy's getting a little over aggressive once they start walking and yanks on the arm, right? Because everything's still growing with the baby and the child, you can end up with brachial plexus injuries because of pulling on that arm, which is why it's not always the best. That I know we all love to do it, right? How many of you guys are going to admit, if you have a younger cousin, brother, sister, whatever it may be, that you grabbed a hold of their arms and you did the spin around in circles with them by holding onto their arms? How many of you have done that? Yeah, right? Congratulations. You have contributed to them possibly getting a palsy later on in life. I'm just kidding. That's not hard proof that you're going to give them a palsy later on in life. By then, it won't matter, right? It's not the best to do that. That also includes doing it from the legs, because the lumbar sacral plexus is stronger than the upper brachial plexus. But you still can actually strain them and give a kid sciatica, which would be really bad. I mean, kids are already a pain in the butt. You don't need to give them a pain in the butt. Or maybe you do. I'm not sure. But when you're looking at the palsy of the arms, that's a more important thing to know than specifically drawing out the brachial plexus. So such things as knowing that Erb's palsy is an upper brachial plexus injury. You know, Klumpke's is lower brachial plexus. And more importantly, like the one that if you get a question on and you get it wrong somehow, I'm not sure what you were thinking, but whole arm palsy. Guess what part of the brachial plexus that actually involves? I mean, it kind of says it in the name, doesn't it? Yeah, the whole thing, right? Whole arm palsy means that whole brachial plexus was strained in some way, shape, or form. And that can happen, especially if maybe the baby's not coming out. You know, a baby's got a hold of mom's insides like, no, don't let me, no, I don't want to leave. And doc's like, oh no, you're coming out, kid. That doesn't actually happen, but sometimes it seems like it with the way the kids don't want to come out, even though their mom is mid-labor, right? Just by the way the baby's born, and doc may pull on it and separate that whole brachial plexus, right? What do you think it's going to look like if a kid has whole arms palsy? What do you think they're going to look like? What's their arm going to look like? How about as a baby? What's their arm going to look like? Think through it. I know it's early. What kind of tone are they going to have? Let's go there. Are they going to be hyper or hypotonic? Okay, so I got one vote for hyper. Do I have any votes for hypo? Okay, so I got one vote for hypo. Just seeing if I can mess with all of you. Usually at birth, they're going to be hypotonic. And then later, as those muscles start developing, they'll start going hypertonic and start contracting in to almost, oh, what type of posture is this? It's pulling towards the core, so decorticate posture, right? And if we leave everyone, if everyone is left alone and never moves, we're all going to kind of pull into that decorticate posturing, which almost looks a lot like, you know, the posturing we're in was a baby, right? That's kind of the way we pull in. So at first, that arm's going to be kind of flaccid. So mom and dad are going to notice baby's got whole arm palsy or Erb's palsy. They're going to notice that the arm's just not functioning as well. And then eventually, they're going to start seeing whatever part is affected start tightening up. So if it's an upper brachial plexus palsy, they'll start contracting into a bicep, right? If it's a lower brachial plexus, they'll start contracting back into the triceps. If it's whole arm, that whole arm will just kind of roll in, right? Is there much we're going to be able to do for a whole arms palsy kid? What do you think? No, right? We might be able to stretch, give them a little bit motion, right? Yeah, make them more comfortable. Exactly. We might, if it's more of a problem with the scalene triangle, that maybe they've got a fibrotic scalene triangle, we might be able to do some IASTM and kind of break up that tissue a little bit to give it a little bit more breathing room. But most of the time, this is going to require surgery, right? And a lot of times, that's where we're going to leave them in that posture where they got the hand kind of curled up so they can still use functional. What's that curled up hand position called? Tenodesis, right? We might leave that tenodesis grasp so that if they need to pick stuff up as a child, they can still do it. Just imagine how different your life would be if you had a brachial plexus injury. Because trust me, I've learned how different it makes your life, right? But just imagine it like from birth that you have lost your right arm or your left arm. That would totally change the way your life is, right? I'd almost think I'd rather have the arm gone than have to deal with an arm that's like this or stuck in, you know, flaccid position that I can't control. I don't know. So again, another great video here I included that has how to kind of draw the brachial plexus if it's something you're specifically that worried about studying. But brachial plexus questions are typically going to tie to either childhood questions, meaning childbirth, and talking about what's the difference between Erb's palsy versus Klumpke's or Erb's versus whole arm. Or it's going to tie to a spinal cord injury where the patient has a C7 spinal cord, there's a C7 neurological spinal cord injury. You know, what does their arm look like? What part of the brachial plexus is left? Will be the upper brachial plexus that's left, right? So they're going to have more of that beginning arm motion versus that terminal arm motion, right? And when we talk about that, when we really, you have somebody that's working arms and hands, a lot of times they'll talk about it that way where they're talking, you know, what they call beginning and then terminal arm motion, where beginning arm motion is the kind of the front half of the arm, whereas terminal arm motion is kind of the back half of the arm and the lower plexus. Does that help with brachial plexus? Does that make anyone feel a little bit more confident or at least less? You have to know all the origins of the plexus. What you really have to know is kind of what the range of the origin of the plexus is. So where does the plexus originate from? What is the range of the plexus? Going back to this kind of picture here. It goes from C what? Okay, so C5, C1. Now some will say C4. Just to let you know, there are some books that say C4, but C5, C1 is a good range to think of. Okay, so if you're thinking about that, what do you think upper plexus typically is going to be considered? What do you think upper plexus? C5, C6, right? maybe the half of C7 sometimes is considered upper plexus, right? So we're going to be up here. And then you have kind of that middle plexus and lower plexus. But a lot of times middle plexus, I'm drawing with my mouse and you can't see it. That was fantastic. Good job, Mr. McKeever. So kind of that middle plexus often gets included with lower plexus. So that's kind of the thought process. You don't necessarily have to know. It's more going to be you're going to have to more know what the nerve root of musculocutaneous is than what part of the brachial plexus musculocutaneous comes off of. Does that make sense? It's more important to know that musculocutaneous arrives from which nerves? Where does musculocutaneous come from? Okay, C5, C6, right? Maybe a little bit of C7 because it does have a little bit of a terminal branch here from C7, right? So it depends upon what you're looking at. If we had a question about brachial plexus, would it be helpful to draw? Yeah, I mean, it may be. I'm not a visual learner, so it wouldn't be helpful to me. I'm more of a book, you know, not visual in the terms of pictures. I'm more of a visual in the picture type of words. So to me, writing out my kind of layout of the brachial plexus was more important than drawing it. But Jacqueline, if you're more right brain where pictures are more important to you, yeah, it may actually be. So if they're going to ask you a question about the brachial plexus, it would be something like you're treating a child in a pediatric setting that has an Erb's palsy injury from birth. Which portion of the brachial plexus is injured during an Erb's palsy injury? That would be kind of what the question will ask you, right? And then what you've got to think to yourself is you've got to go down and look if it's going to list the actual nerve roots or if it's just looking upper, middle, lower plexus. Does that make sense? And a lot of times they may put something like, if they're answering this, so let me get my little drawer out here. Let's change to a different color. All right, it's good. So they may say, so the question I said is, you are treating a patient in a pediatric setting who has Erb's palsy, and I can spell, which portion of the That's the question, right? That would be kind of how your question's going to be worded. And then your answers are going to be something like this. So which of those can you rule out right off the bat? Okay, you can rule out middle plexus, right? But along with middle plexus, good. Along with middle plexus, you got to rule out A. Because A includes middle plexus, doesn't it? You see how that kind of works? Because those are the same answers. So you know those answers are out. So the only thing you have left really is upper plexus. And that's kind of the way the questions are going to be worded about. Does that make sense, Jacqueline? It's a lot more simple than you thought, yeah. It's not going to be specifically going, which nerve roots comprise the posterior and lateral cords of the brachial plexus? No, it's going to be more functional. Or let's say that we've got a patient, let's change this up. And we've got a child with Erb's palsy, all right? And instead of what portion of the brachial plexus, let's say, that's your question now. Treating a patient pediatric subject who has Erb's palsy, which assistive device would be most appropriate to use when first teaching the child to walk? And so you get down here, the answers are gear-wheeled walker, standard walker, crutches, what's your answer there? Why is D the answer? Right, first, right? Exactly. And so whenever you see first, you're looking for safest. Now let's say brachial plexus isn't there. Let's say brachial plexus is, or not brachial plexus, I'm sorry, parallel bars isn't there. And let's say instead of parallel bars, it says, I got one here. Now those are your choices. Okay, why still D? Russell's right. He's got the answer, still D. Let's think about it real quick. Yes, the platform's going to give them more stability without proper use of the arms. Specifically, you know, it gives them that ability to control it more with the shoulders, right? It gives them that ability and kind of gives them something extra to hold on to. Whereas their biceps may not be able to always help them and give them that kind of eccentric loading that they may need on the other standard devices, right? Standing frame would be another excellent example for this, right? But obviously, the first thing we're going to start them off with, no matter what, is in the parallel bars if we can. Does that make sense for everybody? Does everyone understand what the difference is between those? Does that help a little bit, Jackie? I know you said the other one did. Right. So whenever you see most best, always think, almost always when you're looking, almost always when you're seeing most best, it's going to be a device that is safest. Most of the times you see most best, what it's really saying is safest, right? And remember, when you have most and best, this is going to be not only capitalized, but it's also going to be bolded and underlined on your boards. And the main reason is so that you can't argue, oh, I didn't see most or best. It's bold and underlined. Whenever I read through a question, as soon as I see most best, I kind of have to make sure in my brain, I have highlighted that most and best in my brain. Right? I have to think, okay, I need a question that's going most best. I know these are the suckiest questions in the world. The good news is on your boards, there's none of the aboves, all of the aboves. Or both A and C, or A, B, and C, or A and not C. There's none of those type questions. There's always going to be one correct answer. So at least you have that going for you that you don't have to worry about looking at, well, is this not above or none of the above? Does that help with brachial plexus? All right, I'm going to move on. I didn't see anything else. I got a couple on APRAXIA, ATAXIA, because these are the fun ones. Now, some of you may go, I've got this, Mr. McKeever. You beat this into my head enough that I don't have to worry about it. Great, fantastic. Some of you don't have this yet. And so that's why I kind of wanted to make sure if somebody had a problem with it. And again, the main thing when you're looking at these two is that second letter, right? APRAXIA, ATAXIA. This is the plan, right? This is it's taxing to complete the plan. So apraxia is the inability to perform purposeful learned movements or activities, even though there is no sensory or motor impairment that would hinder completion of the task. The plan is no longer intact. Inaction is intact. So what that's saying is you theoretically, physically can perform the tasks. You just don't know how to do it anymore. Your brain doesn't remember how to do it. A lot of times this is a cerebrum problem that also involves the cerebellum, but a lot of times it's a cerebrum problem, and it involves the plan. when it comes to apraxia and ataxia. The good news is ataxia is really simple. We'll cover that in a few seconds here. Apraxia itself is the most difficult of the two because there are multiple types of apraxia. Okay? We have ideational, ideomotor, constructional, and verbal. For the most part, they make sense. So I'm going to start at the bottom with verbal and work my way kind of up because ideomotor and ideational are kind of tied together. So verbal apraxia. Obviously, what do you think the problem is going to be? They can't do what? It's kind of what I have a lot of times, right? Speech is the problem, right? So verbal apraxia, the person has trouble saying what they want to say correctly and consistently, right? So this is not a problem with the jaw. This is not a problem with the tongue. It's a problem implementing that ability. So they have everything functional, voice cord, vocal cords, jaw, tongue, everything's intact to speak. But for some reason, they just can't get that plan down to enact what they need to enact, right? The brain knows what it wants to say, but cannot formulate the plan to actually say it. That's the problem with this. That's verbal apraxia. Constructional apraxia, right? The inability or difficulty to build, assemble, or draw objects. This is an early sign of dementia. Well, aphasia can also include the ability for the tongue to function too, which is that. So that's the problem with that. Or it can also involve the actual Wernicke's area and stuff like that. So it could, absolutely apraxia, because let's say the problem with the plan is you can't integrate Wernicke's area and be fluent. Then yeah, that technically would be an apraxic aphasia. Does that make sense? Because the plan's not there, and the problem is they can't implement that Wernicke's. They could also just have it that they can't integrate anything. They can't ever. That's kind of where they're at. They cannot implement that fully. It's more than stuttering. They just can't get their mouth to move. Right? Nothing is coming out the way they want it. Even though if you look at their jaw, you look at their tongue, and you look at an fMRI of their brain, the bright areas of the brain are lighting up. For some reason, the cerebellum is just not firing. Constructional is the interesting one. Constructional is the inability to identify, build, assemble, or draw objects. This is an early sign of dementia, right? And it's part of the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Test, which I included right here, which is that test that our president said that he aced. So this is the inability. One of the parts of this Montreal assessment is the ability over here to draw a cube, right? Mr. McKeever's horrible drawing of a cube with a mouse. If they don't have the ability to really copy this cube, that can be a lead to a constructional apraxia. Or the clock. This is the big one we see with people that have Alzheimer's or dementia. Has anyone seen what the clocks look like when they draw them? Did any of you encounter this or see anyone do this test? So nowadays it's funny. I actually did this to one of the previous classes. I asked them to draw a clock for me, and this is what I got. That's not exactly a clock. You have to be a little bit more specific, I guess, nowadays, right? I didn't even draw it, right? So drawing the clock is actually drawing the circle. So it says 10 past 11. So I know that my small hand's got to be up here at 11. My large hand's got to be over here at 2. And then you got it labeled basically 12, 1, 2, 3, 4. And based on how you draw it will determine, mine really would fail with the mouse. That would be a sign that I've got dementia. But I'm just going to blame it on the fact that I'm drawing with my mouse right now, not that I have dementia, right? If you see somebody that's got dementia, their clocks, a lot of times they look like this, and their hands are out here like this. Because they have the inability to actually structurally draw stuff anymore. It's kind of wild. Right, so that's part of that cognitive assessment. And then if you look down here, we've got some common words here that you're identifying, right? Lion, rhino, and camel, right? Or as someone would call that, Geico. So you've got those, and you've got some words that you're remembering here. All of that is looking, do you have any type of apraxia in your brain? It'll help things go through, right? So those are constructional apraxia, speech or verbal apraxia. Ideational, ideomotor are the ones that are really confusing, okay? So ideational, you cannot perform a task on command, but randomly it can occur. So this would be an example of, I ask you to raise your arm, and you concentrate and you can't raise that arm. You're thinking about it, you're telling your body to raise the arm's not raising it. But maybe I swing my hand by and say, okay, hit the target. And suddenly your arm raises up and touches my hand. It's not fully volitional at that point. It's more kind of hit or miss when it occurs, right? Versus ideomotor, that it can't be performed on command or random. So ideomotor, it's completely knocked out. It doesn't matter what happens, you're not going to do it. Ideational, if you try to do it, you won't be able to do it. But it may occur at random. Let's think about the bladder as an excellent example here. So let's say I have an apraxic bladder. And I'm sitting there thinking, I go to sit on the toilet and I know that I need to go to the bathroom. So I tell my brain, you need to pee. And it doesn't happen. But then I get back to the bed and I urinate in bed. Which would that be? Ideational or ideomotor? So I can't perform it on command, but randomly it happens. Yeah, the ideational apraxia. Now, let's say, I'm trying, it doesn't happen randomly anymore, it doesn't happen on command, and they have to cath me. That would be more of an ideomotor. Does that make sense? Does that help clarify those two? Now, could I also be cath for ideational? Absolutely, I could be. And that would kind of remove all the problems with it, right? It would especially help keep me from having accidents. Those are the two hardest kind of apraxias to get. And then understand the difference between apraxia and ataxia are the big ones. Does that make sense for apraxia at least? Are we doing okay? I miss giving these high-level instruction classes. Because you guys are smart, SMRT. Are we okay so far? Move on to ataxia. I'm going to move on to ataxia. All right, so ataxia is the inability to perform coordinated movements. The plan is intact, the inaction is damaged. Let's look at the symptoms of ataxia, and you tell me what it reminds you of. Lack of coordination, slurred speech, trouble eating and swallowing, deterioration of fine motor skills, difficulty walking, gait abnormalities, eye tracking problems, tremors, and heart issues with rhythm. Tell me what that looks like. Yes, right? It looks like somebody's had a little too much to drink, right? So when I think of the difference between apraxia and ataxia, the person usually looks more drunk. Does that make sense? Because the person kind of looks like they're all over the place and uncoordinated. Whereas with apraxia, they just can't do it. Right? They know their muscles are there, everything's strong, they're good, they just can't do it. Right? So ataxia is the implementation of the plan, and it's usually the cerebellum that's affected. Ataxia equals Justin. Got it. I like that. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. I have no idea. Even Jeanette laughs at that one. That's good. So the implementation of the plan is the problem here, right? So this is kind of a good graph looking at what happens when you are ataxic, right? Eye movement problems. What kind of an eye symptom do you think you're going to have if you have ataxia? Nystagmus, good, right? And now it's probably not going to be a beating nystagmus. It's not going to be one where it beats to one specific side. So it's not necessarily going to be vestibular an issue. It's going to be central an issue. Lack of coordination, trouble eating or swallowing. Diplopia could be a problem, right? Yep, exactly. Why would that be a problem? Well, that's a problem with the actual eyes and the muscles doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Or you could end up with cross-eyed. All of a sudden your eyes just go right in the middle of your nose. Or worse, they do the opposite, the guy from Waterboy, where the one eye's, look at me, I am. Look at my good eye. Even heart problems, right? That's a musculoskeletal problem if your heart's going out of rhythm. Deterioration of fine motor skills, gait problems, poor balance. All of this looks exactly like somebody that's had too much to drink. So your patient's going to be trying, so if you're trying to sit to stand with them and they're apraxic, right? It'll depend upon if they're ideomotor or ideational, right? So if they're ideomotor, they're going to try to stand up and they're not going to be able to. Now, what if you help them stand up? Can they still stand up? Let's say you get a hold of that gait belt and you lift them straight up. Are they able to stand then? Sometimes, yeah. Right? Because it may be just that sit to stand that's the problem with the apraxia. That part is just knocked out. Now you get them standing, they're fine. And you're just like, what is wrong with you, dude? And you tell them to sit down, they're like, I am, and they're standing up. No. Knock their knees out and they sit down. Right? Ideational would be a little different. You're telling them to sit, stand, they can't, and you turn your back on them for 1 second, and all of a sudden they pop up. And you're like, why did you do that? I don't know. Because all of a sudden, for whatever reason, the plan got implemented. Right? Versus ataxia. What am I going to look like if I'm trying to stand up with ataxia? I'm going to kind of look like what? Well, I wasn't going to go there, but right. Okay, almost there, right? I'll get it the next time, right? That's kind of the way you're going to look when you're trying to stand up. You're going to be looking very much like you have an alcohol problem. Now, does that mean alcoholics are ataxic? Yeah. Right? Because what gets affected, what part of the brain gets affected when we drink alcohol? Cerebellum. Right? Now, other things do get affected as well, like the frontal lobe, right? Obviously. Because the frontal lobe is telling you, you can stand up perfectly fine and nobody can tell you differently. But in reality, no, you can't, right? I can ride that bull over there just fine. No, seriously, you need to sit. I'm good. Okay, go for it. Right? That type of an idea with ataxia. Does that help break down the difference between ataxia and apraxia? Awesome. I didn't organize this very well because spinal cord injuries next. Traumatic brain injury should be next. But. So spinal cord injuries. And the main question I had on this is, how much do I need to know? Because there's a lot. And I'm going to say a lot. Right? But let's break it down into simple things. Know your dermatomes and myotomes. And I told you this since semester 1. If you know your dermatomes and your myotomes inside and out, you can answer a lot of the questions on your boards. I mean, if you know them backwards, forwards, sideways, and 6 ways to Sunday, you can answer a lot of the questions on your boards. Because a lot of your questions are going to be talking about what muscles function and what muscles don't function. Right? You need to know the difference between injury level versus neurological level. Injury level is what? Yeah, where it happened, right? So if I get stabbed at, say, L1, that's my injury level. What's the neurological level again? Okay, could be T11, good, right? But what does the neurological level mean again? What's the specifics about neurological level? It's the most caudal level that I have what? Could be one level above, right? Usually about 2, but it could be 1 level above if you're ideally, right? So it's the most caudal level. I have full sensory and motor. One more key thing. One more key word. Starts with a B. BI. Bilaterally. Good, right? So your neurological level is the most caudal level you have that is fully functional, both sensory and motor-wise, bilaterally. All right, so if I've got an L1 injury, my best could be 1 level above, right? It could be T12. But more than likely, I'm going to have some problems at T12. So I might be a T10 or T11. That doesn't mean I don't have any function at T10, T11, T12, T13, T14, T15. They don't exist. Hope I don't have function at T15. I'm going to be really tall, right? That doesn't mean I don't have any function below that neurological level. It just means that I don't have full function. Right now, that's the kind of main thing you need to know. You need to know the difference between a complete and an incomplete spinal cord injury. Do you remember what the difference between a complete and an incomplete spinal cord injury is? I almost leaked it. You'll get my joke in a second. What's the difference between complete and incomplete? I say partial or full use. It's whether you have full control over what? Full or partial control over leaked, get it? Bowel and bladder, right? Your most caudal level of your spine, right? That S4, S5 region. Do you have full function of your bowel and bladder, or do you have partial function? If you have no function, you're a complete. If you have some function, you're incomplete. So let's say I've got that L1. So again, L1 spinal cord injury, that's where my injury is at. And let's say my neurological level is T10. What are your questions going to look like? Your questions are going to look like something about, could you leave the patient sit at edge of bed? Almost every answer for that is going to be what? No. Good, right? Could you leave me sitting up in a chair? At the T10 level. What do you think? Depends on what? Good. Depends on the chair, right? A reclined chair would be ideal, or at least a chair that has what? Some form of armrest on the side, right? Yeah, especially locked. Locked would be really ideal, right? Or a chair with no wheels, period, would be even more ideal, right, Jenna? So they can't escape. So anything that provides me with some lateral support, because I've got some core, I just don't have full core, right? What about walking? I'm a T10. Probably not. Now, what happens if I've got quad use? I'm a T10 in neurological level. What happens if I got quad use? Could I at least get standing maybe? Yeah, maybe. Right? So maybe I'm an incomplete and I have that sacral sparing, or I have a zone of partial preservation, right? That's where we're going to use orthoses. Good. Or maybe a standing frame. Right? Something to that effect. So let's take a different level. So I am a neurological level C4. What type of a wheelchair am I going to need? Good. Sip and puff is the proper term. The blow wheelchair. In Vegas, that can mean a lot of things, right? So the sip and puff wheelchair, you definitely, because I've got, what happens if I've got finger control? Maybe could I use a manual control wheelchair? Yeah, right, maybe say I've got, because I've seen it where I'm a C4, but I've got index finger control. I'm still gonna order the sip and puff, but I may order also want some manual control, right? Depending on dexterity, that's the big thing, exactly, Jenna. Now let's take me down to, let's say I'm a C5, C6. All right, let's just say C6. Let's say C6. Probably still gonna need a joystick. You're right. Why? What am I missing? Can't use triceps. Good. Now, could I cheat and maybe use my delts? Yeah, I could probably cheat. Right, that's the thing. It's going to be exhausting. It's not going to be beneficial, right? But does that mean they couldn't do it in physical therapy? No, we may do that in physical therapy because maybe he gets in a case where we have to teach him that his power wheelchair dies. And he has to get back to where he can get his battery. Right? We may order him a power wheelchair with manual function as well, where he can actually still at least use his delts to kind of get him over to where he can get a new battery. Right? Or maybe we have to teach him what happens if he has to get out of the wheelchair in an emergency. Right? So it's going to be exhausting. You're exactly right. Now let's say I'm a T5 neurological level. What type of wheelchair? Normal wheelchair, but what are you going to probably want to order with it? Yeah, straps, chest restraints, right? Usually that 4-point harness to keep me upright, right? Do I need a headrest control? Do I need my head's something to support my head? Probably not at T5. My head's pretty good, right? But my core is just kind of jello. So you put me in the wheelchair and I'm looking like this, and it's going to be really hard for me to move. Where you get those belts and straps where I'm upright, I can actually propel it, right? And they do have, I just saw one the other day that's a little more advanced than the sip and puff. I saw one that was a head control wheelchair, where if the patient has functional upper traps, they can use their head to control their wheelchair, which I think is kind of beneficial because at that point they're still doing some exercise rather than just, right? At least they're doing something with their upper body. Let's say I'm a C3, C2, C3 injury. What type of wheelchair? Yeah, probably a caregiver. Yeah, I'm probably not breathing on my own, which means I've probably got some form of a respirator, right, or ventilator, right? I'll be lucky if I get in a wheelchair, right? Now, they do make wheelchairs, just like they make the boards that the person can speak with ALS. They do make some wheelchairs that are now eye-controlled. But just think about that for a second. What kind of function is that going to be? That's not going to be very functional, right? You bump your eye, you know, somebody looks at you and you're like, and all of a sudden your wheelchair shoots forward. That wouldn't work out very well. Or you see somebody across the room and you're like, hey, and all of a sudden your wheelchair shoots back to the wall. During allergy season, right? Every time you sneeze, the wheelchair shoots across the room. I think I would have mine planned to say something really foul every time I sneezed if I had one of those reading boards. So the main thing here is knowing what muscles will be functional when you have a specific neurological level. And with spinal cord injuries, the big issue is safety and safe transfers, right? So what level do you think you need before you go away from the sliding board? What would you want to be into? What levels? Yeah, the lumbar, right? Yeah, once we get down to the lumbars, we can start, and maybe even T4, right? Because you can still have some trunk control, but even that's going to be a lot of a caregiver transfer, right? More than you actually transferring yourself, right? And sliding board is going to be, at least we want to get down to where we have triceps. If we don't have triceps, sliding board is not going to be an option. So let's say we don't have triceps. How can we transfer? How can the patient transfer out of the bed to the wheelchair? What could they use? Let's say they're missing triceps. They don't have the ability to use a sliding board. How are they going to get out to the chair? Well, caregiver, obviously, right? But how else could they? Could be a max transfer, right? There are actually lifts that are made for people to get out of bed themselves. Now, in order to use that lift yourself, somebody has to set up the transfer harness before you go to bed. And you have to know that you're safe in the harness. And they do make lifts that you can actually use on your own. The person has to have functional biceps, and they have to be safe enough to do it. I wouldn't suggest it, but they do make some lifts out there that their patients are able to do that with. Does that make sense for spinal cord injuries? Is there any questions on spinal cords? All right. I'm going to move on since it doesn't seem like there are. And TBIs. What do you need to know about TBIs? Well, traumatic brain injuries are bad, okay? That's the main thing you need to know about TBIs, is that they're not good. You have to know the difference between RLA and GCS. What's RLA, LCFS? A lot of letters. Whenever you see RLA, it means what? Ranchos Los Amigos, right? And then LCFS is what? The level of cognition. Good. So level of cognitive function. Good. Glasgow Coma Scale is the GCS, right? Which one are you going to get first? Let's say you have a really bad traumatic brain injury. Are you going to be rated on the GCS first or the LCFS first? GCS, probably right, especially if you got a really bad one that you're in a coma. The main thing you need to understand is the lower the number, the worse in both of them. On the lower levels of LCFS, you're going to want private rooms or cohorts to treat the patient, not in the gym. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And then when we get to the level of cognitive functioning scale, what do you have to know specifically about that? You have to think about what you can expect for the patient to retain day to day. Right? So I want to move forward to the Glasgow, and I'll come back to the LCFS. So the Glasgow Coma Scale. Anything with a Glasgow Coma Scale of 8 or less pretty much means they're out of it. They're done. They're not responding to you. Moderate, 9 to 12. Mild, 13 to 15. So what do you have to remember about that is that when you get up to that 13 to 15 level, you're starting to get where we're going to start doing LCFS. Right? But before that, they're pretty much going to be bedridden. So here's kind of that way to remember how to measure the GCS or the GCS. Does that mean you have to know all this? No, but what it does you do have to remember is that the lower the amount of points, the worse the patient is. What really is important for the GCS is what's the minimal score of the GCS? What's the lowest score you can get? Just looking at these here. Lowest score you can get is a lowest score I can get is a 3. Yeah. No response, 1. No response, 1. No response, 1. So the lowest score I can get is a 3. I don't know why they did this. I would expect 0 to make more sense to me. But for some reason, there's some scientific reason why they did 3. And we'll just say that people are smarter and they did this. That's my answer to that, and I'm just going to stick with it. Right? And then from there on, as they improve, that's when they're gonna go move to the LCFS, right? who is going to do the Glasgow Coma Scale probably? Are we going to be involved in that? What do you think? Could we reassess them on the Glasgow Coma Scale? Let's go that way. As PTAs. I know this is getting long. We could reassess them, but most of the time it's going to be assessed by either the nurse or the doctor that took them in. Right? Maybe the PT. The PT might assess to see if the doctor knows what they're talking about. But for the most part, it's going to be assessed by the doctor or the nurse. So then going back to the LCFS. Now we've gotten out of our kind of coma state. We're starting to get out of it. We maybe, if you look at the lower levels, we're still in that kind of stupor phase of the coma where we may get no specific response. At what point in this scale, in the LCFS, do you think standard physical therapy would be most appropriate? Looking at the LCFS. When could we really start doing standard type physical therapy? By standard, I mean some exercises, maybe some standing. Seven's perfect, Melissa, but that would be anywhere from 4 to 5. 4 to 5 is where we're going to start doing some kind of standard physical therapy. Now, at 4, Jackie was, that's right, I forgot about that. At 4, we're going to have to be really careful, right? At 4, we're going to have to be really careful. We can still do stuff with them. Let's go 3 through 1. What do you think we might be doing with the patient? Range of motion, maybe edge of bed sitting, bed mobility, right? So 3 through 1, we're not doing much. 4, we can start doing stuff. So what are the questions going to look like? The questions are going to say, you were treating Mr. McKeever today. And Mr. McKeever is a level 5 confused, inappropriate, non-agitated patient on the LCFS. What could you expect to carry over day to day with Mr. McKeever? What should you expect pretty much to carry over? If I'm confused, inappropriate, but non-agitated, is anything going to carry over? Probably not, right? What type of a cohort or what type of a treatment area would you want to treat me in? Again, I'm level 5. Probably a private setting, right? Not because of the agitation, because my agitation's down now. But what might I do that would be kind of upsetting to the other patients? Because remember, I'm inappropriate. Yeah, I can talk smack, absolutely. Yep. Be like, do you see, I'm much better than you are, John, right? Well, let's think now, ladies, you're treating a patient like me that's level 5. What do you have to worry about? Yes, grabbing. Talking about your butt, exactly. That's a possibility too, right? Or worse yet, grabbing your butt, Melissa, right? Guys, if you got a little old lady that's in that phase, watch out. Just warning you, right? They're not afraid of grabbing butts either. So that's where you've got to just kind of protect yourself a little bit. Think about what you're going into, right? Maybe take an extra set of hands, maybe co-treat with the OT, right? Because now you can work on standing while the OT is working on brushing their teeth. And you got 2 people there, right? Let's say I'm back at the level 4 stage. So I have twice as much to grab. Exactly, Jenna. But let's say I'm back at the level 4 stage. Would you want to co-treat me at level 4? What do you think? So I'm level 4, I'm confused, and I'm agitated. Would you want 2 people in the room? What's going to happen with 2 people in the room? Yeah, right? And not only that, but more confusion, exactly, because now I'm telling you to stand up. The other person's like, okay, reach for me. And the person's like, am I standing up or am I reaching? What am I doing? Right? One person with a calm voice, right? This is where Mr. Heaver has to really reach down into that deep Zen moment inside of him and calm my voice down and work with them on a very low level to not excite that anger. So at what level could you expect some carryover from session to session? Yeah, I'm starting to get 7. I'm starting to get some carryover. Good. Maybe some at 6 when they're starting to transition from 6 to 7, you might get some carryover, but not a lot, right? So let's say, let's look at the difference between a 5 and a 6 level patient right now. So confused inappropriate versus confused appropriate. Confused inappropriate, you're going to tell me to stand up, and I'm going to take my shirt off. Now, did I do that on purpose? Maybe. Maybe I did. You don't know. It could have been that you told me to stand up, and what I heard was take shirt off. That's the inappropriate response. Doesn't necessarily mean they're inappropriate with you. It just means you're getting the wrong response from them. Confused appropriate. Now you tell me to stand up, and I'll be like, okay, I want to, but I don't remember how. And so now you've got to walk me through the steps. Automatic, now we're going to start giving them a regular schedule. Okay, so you're going to have OT at 7 o'clock. You're going to have PT at 8 o'clock. We're going to brush our teeth at 6. That's when we start getting that kind of normal response. Do you think we're going to see a lot of 8s in the hospital? That purposeful appropriate? Not really. A lot of time we get to 7 and they're going to be discharged. The only other thing that's kind of adding now into traumatic brain injuries for PT is CTE, right? I talked a good bit about CTE. What is CTE again? Yeah, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, right? That's where my brain is basically turning into what? Mush. Right? My brain is literally becoming mush because of all the injuries I've got, right? It's atrophying like crazy. Where do we see that a lot? Where are we going to see CTE at? Athletes. Good. Specifically athletes in contact sports, right? Football, hockey. I was hoping I didn't catch the video, but in the last Lightning game, right before they got to the final round here, one of the players got hit in the head and landed on the ground and went instantly into corticate posturing. I have to get that video because it just shows what happens. That tells me that person's had a bunch of blows to the head, or that blow was that bad, but it did not look that bad. It looked like it was like an elbow to the head that any other hockey player takes, and they go down and get back up and they lose a tooth and they're back in the game, right? So those repetitive blows add up over time, right? And as you add up over time, those symptoms start occurring, right? And they'll start getting dementia-like symptoms, Parkinson-like symptoms. And eventually, they'll have full-on Parkinson's and dementia, right? And they can have it at a very early level. I was watching the preview. I don't know if you guys saw this. USA's doing a show called The Bradshaws with Terry Bradshaw, who was a quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I was noticing in some of his speech patterns in the preview for the show that he definitely is not enunciating as clearly as he used to when he was broadcasting, which is why I think he's left a lot of the broadcasting now. He's just not enunciating as clearly as he was. Those hits to the head have clearly taken a toll on him, right? It's just terrifying. All right, are we good on TBIs? Last thing I have to cover is pediatric reflexes. And then I can give you guys a little bit of a breather here. Let's go to pediatric reflexes. Pediatric reflexes. So remember, pediatric reflexes, again, maybe 2, 3 questions. Don't freak out about them. Generalize the dates to you. More important to know that when things must be integrated by, less than know the range which they will integrate. So something like, you must know that Babinski must be integrated by 24 months. Otherwise, they are abnormal. Not necessarily that it'll integrate between 6 and 12 months. That's not as important as when it must be integrated by. More importantly also is why reflexes have to integrate, right? The rooting reflex has to integrate in order for a baby to be able to feed and get nutrition. Palmar grasp reflex, important to integrate so baby can pull themselves up. Plantar grasp, important to integrate so baby can walk. They're on page 277 and 278 of your Score Builders textbook. When you're looking at those, don't try to memorize the range. Look at it and go, okay, so it said, even if it says 8 months, I tried to generalize everything down into quarters. So I'd say it's got to be integrated by 9. Because let's say I've got a question on Babinski, which has to be integrated by 24 months. They're going to say that a baby child, pediatric patient, probably is what they'll say, presents with Babinski reflex at what age must Babinski reflex be integrated by? And so it'll say 12 months, 6 months, 8 months, 24 months. Your answer is by 24 months. It's not going to give you, it's like 23 months, 24 months, 25 months. You're going to have a very clear answer in that range that you need. It's not going to be try and trick you where it's like 12 weeks, 13 weeks, 14 weeks. That's not going to be the way it's going to work. So just be aware of that. The only other thing I'll say is be aware to read, because I could also list that as 2 years. So I could say 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. And your brain sees 2 and goes, well, that's less than 18, so 18's got to be the best answer here. Even though 2 years is the right answer. So just be aware that you can think of that kind of abstractly in your brain. Don't get hung up on pediatric reflexes. Get more of what they're needed for. If you can get that, most of the rest of the stuff will come. Because if you can think about stuff like, well, baby needs to be able to walk, so it definitely needs probably palmar and plantar grasp reflex, because the baby's got to be able to creep along furniture, so the baby's got to be able to stand up. What is the point for the moral reflex? Well, that's to protect baby so that baby, when baby falls, doesn't hurt himself, right? It provides with startle. Rooting reflex we talked about. ATNR is to help roll over, right? So all of those kind of are the idea of what you want them to help integrate for. Does that make sense for pediatric reflexes? Is there anything specific I can answer on pediatric reflexes? I only had like one question, one person asked for this, but I just want to make sure that you understood it's not as much, you don't have to memorize everything on that chart. Because everything on that chart's only if you're going to work with kids. Just remember, you're not supposed to graduate as, yeah, right. You're not supposed to graduate as a specialized PTA. You're not supposed to graduate specialized in neuro or specialized in peds or specialized in musculoskeletal. You're supposed to graduate with a generalized degree. That's exactly right, Chris. So figure out which reflexes work with what they're trying to do. That's the best thing. And the book actually does a pretty good job of that. It'll tell you what they're integrating for, right? That's the main thing that your questions are going to be about. There may be 1 or 2 questions, and they're going to be common ones. Like it'll talk about maybe when should the rooting reflex be integrated by. That's got to be integrated pretty early, doesn't it? So look for the earliest date, right? Because rooting is important or the baby doesn't feed. Side note, what maybe causes a baby not to have a rooting reflex? What do you think? What could cause that? What do you think might cause it? Yeah, upper motor neuron disorder. Exactly. Yeah, brain injury usually. So how are they going to have to feed the baby probably? If the baby's not latching on, you're not going to be able to feed them that way with a bottle even. Yeah, tube. Sadly, right? And hope that eventually they'll watch to see if the baby starts sucking on the tube. If the baby starts sucking on the tube, they're starting to integrate that reflex. And maybe it was just a delayed growth of that reflex. Any other questions on peds, pediatric reflexes, or anything in general? So my last section is there anything else that I haven't mentioned that you have a question on that you're worried about, other than the whole test? Yeah, cardiopalm, right? Dr. O'Neill did do a pretty decent job with her PowerPoint with cardiopalm. What I'm going to also tell you about cardiopalm is it's big, but it's not as big as neuro. If I'm a betting person, I want to make sure I know musculoskeletal inside and out. Once I know musculoskeletal inside and out, I want to make sure I know neuro inside and out. And then once I know neuro inside and out, I want to know cardiopalm. And with cardiopalm, the main thing about cardiopalm, okay, I'll cover that in a second here, is that the main thing with cardiopalm, and even when you see Dr. O'Neill's PowerPoint about it, is knowing how the pathologies affect the cardiopulmonary system and maybe the basics of the pharmacology of it. Most of the pharmacology meds that you're going to be taking for cardiopalm, your questions are going to be based on safety. So if the patient's on an angiotensin, what are you going to have to monitor? What do you think you're going to have to monitor if a patient's on any type of cardiopulmonary meds? Yeah, your blood pressure, right, and pulse rate. What if they're on a anticoagulant or a clot buster? What do you have to monitor them for? Bleeding and bruising. Yeah, DVTs, exactly. So those are the things. It's more about the safety than it is specifically about cardiopulm. Cardiopulm patient that's had a what am I trying to say here? A triple bypass, that's what I was trying to say. Or a double bypass. When you're teaching them to cough, how are you going to have to teach them to cough? Yeah, what's that called? What's the technical term for that? The width of the pillow is right. Bracing or splinting. And short huff is going to be the ideal goal. Good, right? So know your ACBs, right? So what's the first stage of breathing? Active cycle of breathing. First stage is belly. Second stage is what? Rib flare. Good, right? Thoracic expansion. And the third stage is clearance, right? Whatever clearance technique you teach them, whether it's coughing, whether it's short huff, long huff, anything like that. And again, most of the times in what I've seen in the real world is you're going to teach, if they can't cough, you're going to teach them huffing. If they can cough, you're going to teach them to cough and then huff to clear the cough. Coughing is going to get it up to here, and then huffing is going to get out here. And then the other thing with cardiopulmonary is understand the blood flow of the heart. How does it go through the heart, right? What does it come back to the heart via? Where does it go? Where does it go from there? Where does it go from there? That type of thing. If you know that, it's a pretty good part of the actual cardiopulmonary. Brain anatomy. Do you have to specifically be able to identify if this is the parietal lobe or if this is the temporal lobe? Not necessarily. What you have to know about brain anatomy is if I have a TBI and I have something like a Q counter Q left to right side, what am I going to present like? if I have a coup counter coup from the front to back, what am I going to look like? You know, if I have damage or cardiopulmonary insufficiency, blood pressure higher. It can be. Yeah, absolutely. It can also be your blood pressure can also go higher if you have arterial problems as well, right? If you have arterial atherosclerosis. What do you think is going to be higher? Which blood pressure might be higher with venous insufficiency, systolic or diastolic? Usually with venous, you're probably going to have a little bit higher on both. Whereas if it's arterial, it's mainly just the systolic. Does that make sense? I mean, your diastolic can be up too with arterial, but it's not as important as that systolic. Back to brain. You know, the other thing you might have to know for brain is if I have a stroke in my cerebellum, what am I going to look like? I'm going to look like I'm drunk. Right? If I have a stroke in my cerebrum, I'm going to have problems with APRAXIA. If I have a stroke in my anterior cortex, part of the brain, I'm going to have problems with problem solving, you know, emotions. I'm going to have emotional ability. I have problems if I have stroke in the posterior cortex, right? I'm going to have problems with sight. Those are the things kind of you have to think about when you talk about brain anatomy. Is not necessarily does the where does the cingulate cortex sit in the brain. That's not as important as knowing if I have a stroke here, what does it look like? If I have a TBI here, what do I look like? But a lot of times, again, it's going to come back to if I've got a stroke in my cerebellum, right? What is the first thing you're going to do before you get the patient out of bed? Put a gate bottle on them, right? If I have a stroke in my cerebrum where my cortical planning is occurring, I probably want to orient my patient as one of my first things I do with them to see how bad they're doing with processing, right? And I'm probably going to orient them especially to spatial or some sort of abstract so I can see how they're processing weird things is. Lab values. Lab values, again, maybe one question. So that's the main thing with that is don't focus a ton on lab values. What you need to know for lab values is look at what your upper and lower ranges are and round them. Make them something easy to remember. Don't be like, oh, well, this says, you know, 37 to 57 deciliters. Well, no, to me, that's going to be 40 to 70. Because again, they're not going to give you a question that says 70 or 69. It's going to be like 80, and it's going to be, or it's going to be 10. It's going to be a clear abnormal value. But with your lab values, most of the time you're not going to have to decipher what the lab value means, but it'll say that the patient has a low white blood cell count, or let's just go with high white blood cell count. The patient presents with so many grams per deciliter of white blood cells. This reading is in the high range. What do you suspect is causing the patient to have high white blood cell count? What do you think causes white blood cells? Well, infection. Right? What else could cause it? What's the big one that could affect lab values in general? Cancer. Yeah, lab values can mess up cancer or cancer can mess up lab values like crazy. Right? So your main lab values you have to remember. Red blood cells, including your RBC count and your H&H count. Those are the three main ones you must know. So your red blood cell count, your hematocrit and hemoglobin. Those ones, no. Because H&H counts are really common for them to write questions about. Because those are important to know if you can get the patient out of bed. And then platelets. Yeah, that was the next one I was going to go. So platelets is the next one. So if I had to stage my trying to memorize lab values, I have my RBC measurement. So the complete red blood cell count, my H&H, and then my next level is my platelets. That's the next one I'm going to memorize. Is it going to be as important to memorize bilirubin? Probably not. The likelihood of you getting a bilirubin question is pretty low. What about acid-base pH levels in the blood? It's going to tell you if they're acidic or basic. But what it'll ask you is what systems are responsible for regulating the acid-base levels of the blood. What are the two systems that regulate it? Respiratory, good. What other set of organs? So your lungs and your kidneys. And spleen has to do with regulating the actual blood. Yes, so spleen will have to do with the actual, red blood cell count, measuring it. But the regulation of it itself is the spleen, or the lungs and the kidneys are the main ones, right? But let's say a patient has a splenic lac, so a splenic laceration. What blood cell count's going to be off? I kind of just hinted at it. RBCs, right? And then platelets secondary, right? Because platelets are probably going to be high because they're going to pump the volume up in order to make up for the loss of red blood cells. Platelets are also responsible and really important for helping with clotting too, so don't forget about that. Do you have to know the INRs? Probably not. But again, RBC, H&H, platelets are your important ones. And then knowing what a high white blood cell versus low white blood cell count is. I mean, don't specifically memorize those, what levels in infection, what levels not in infection, but just know what would be considered high and what would be considered low. I hope that makes those feel a little bit better because there's not going to be a lot of questions on those. But your H&H counts are important. Those are real. I'm sure that those of you that might have been inpatient may have heard your CI is asking what the H&H counts on patients are quite a bit. At least I used to, especially in the cardiac patients or patients that have wounds. Main thing I'll tell you also about the boards, everything you just learned at clinics, forget. Because everything you just learned at clinics kind of teaches you some shortcuts. And remember that there are no shortcuts in the boards. Right? So, when you're doing range of motion in the clinic, you may have just measured range of motion. But remember, to truly measure range of motion according to the boards, you first of all have to line up on all your landmarks. Then you have to take the passive range of motion of the patient and get your end feels. Once you get the passive range of motion and get your end feels, then you have to have the patient move through the active range of motion to see how much active range of motion they have. Then you have to compare your passive range of motion measurement versus your active range of motion measurement. Anything else? Does that make you feel a little bit better at least, I hope? Okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing here. Bring myself back to center because I'm awesome. I look so professional with my nice long goatee, my winter goatee. All right, so here's the deal from now on. I'm going to give you this coverage, then I want to apologize to you guys. From now until the board, I am opening my schedule completely up. Meaning, if you need something, contact me. I'll be available. Right? If you need 5-10 minutes, contact me. I know you're going to be terrified. If you're not terrified, I'm worried. That's the thing. If you're not terrified, I'm really worried about you. I'm still terrified of the boards, and I just took a score builder's test myself just to see how well I do. I'm not going to tell you how well I do because I don't want to make you guys feel bad. Just kidding. It's important that I do well. I'm probably one of the few people that constantly take those tests just because I think it's important for me to be able to take them. Right, sleep is the most important thing. So especially come like the day before the boards, you need to sleep. You guys need it. You have to have some energy for the day of the boards. That was my biggest mistake going to the boards is I didn't sleep very well the night before. I'll tell you, yeah. I'll tell you if you're ready or not ready. It's why you want to keep in touch with me. Right now, you got to be on the ball. If you want a one-on-one session with me, say something like this didn't work for you, and you want to spend some one-on-one time with me, reach out to me. I've already got 3 people, like I said, that are going to be meeting with me later. So I'm glad to set up, even if it's in the evening. Maybe you have something where your kid goes to bed at 8 o'clock and it's after 8 o'clock. That's fine. Let me know. I am allowed to clock in that late and work with you. That's according to Dr. O'Neill now. So, you know, if you need it that late, just let me know. Or if you need it early, maybe your person gets up at 4 o'clock. We've already realized I'm up at 4 o'clock anyway. So whatever you need. I don't think any of you guys are up that early. I think I'm pretty much the only, maybe you guys with kids. And only because you're like, go back to bed. I'm gonna stop recording here.